Hello, everyone. This is episode 13 of Tea Time with Tierra, and today we have a very special guest. The pastor of Spirit of the Cross, Richard, is here today with us. So I'm interested, and also our very special co-host, Pete, is with us today. So we want to thank you, first of all, for taking the time to do this conversation with us.
Thank you.
So you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, of course, my name is Richard Barham. I have been out since my late 20s. I was raised in a little town, northeast Alabama town, Bridgeport.
That's a little town.
It is a little town.
It's a small town.
Jackson County, certainly not a gay mecca by any stretch.
Right.
And growing up, I always knew that I was different. I didn't have a name for it, but I knew that I was different. I was raised a Southern Baptist. I started preaching when I was 15 years old, and have preached all of my life, but I knew deep down that I was different. As I grew older, I knew it was gay. And how does a Baptist pastor deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
And I served as pastor of Kennedy Baptist Church. That's in the western part of the state, not far from Tuscaloosa. And the whole time I was just pretty good at keeping it as a little compartment. I was a good Baptist kid. I played by the rules, but deep down I was absolutely miserable. And I kept praying, something, God, take this away from me. God, I've always heard I shouldn't be like this. And I did everything. If you say, you need to do this in order to be delivered from that, well, I did it. And it would never leave me. And the turning point in my life came when I was a Southern Baptist pastor and I was preparing a lesson. And it was where Jesus said that you know a tree by its fruit. And a good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. And it just dawned on me, wait a minute, Richard, you have good fruit. It might not be as much fruit, little, I don't know how fruity that we would become, but it might not be as much fruit as you need. I don't know what Christian can say that, but it's good fruit. How can that be if I'm doomed to hell, God doesn't love me, the church has no place for me, I'm some type of pervert or this and that and other? How can you have good fruit but yet be a bad tree? Jesus said you can't be. And so that was the turning point of, wait a minute, maybe I need to go back and re-examine these scriptures, and is it really true that God condemns me? That was the only thing that was keeping me from being who I really was. And once I went back and studied on my own, using the information, the biblical methods taught to me by Southern Baptists from Southern Baptist seminaries, I went back and I discovered, wait a minute, God does not condemn gay people. And once I had that settled, then there was nothing that's going to keep me in the closet, and I eventually came out.
I think that's a big issue with our community. It's because the ones I've talked to, just since I've been coming here in November of last year, they're always saying they're just going to go to hell because I too was tormented and told that I was going to hell. Yeah, I chose to believe differently, and so what would you say to those people that I've already tried to talk to? What could you tell them that would give them a better comfort?
It is tough. It is tough, and it's tough because of all of the baloney, and I could say other words, but I'm not going to say those words, that we are told from our pulpits, from our seminaries, and so forth. And it's really hard, if you've heard something all of your life, it's really hard to break away from that. What my advice would be to people is, you know your experience with the Lord. I've had people in this church, and just a few weeks ago, I had a person who came to church for the first time in 15, 20 years. And they wanted to speak with me after the service. Why did they want to speak with me after the service? Because they felt so much at home. They felt the presence of the Lord. They felt love. Everything that they knew growing up had come back to them, but those old those old cassette tapes, that old tape kept playing, and it was like, but Brother Richard, the Bible says, so I know this is not true. I mean, what do you mean it's not true? You have experienced it, you know it, and could it be that these particular scriptures have been misinterpreted, just like the scriptures dealing with slavery and women have been misinterpreted? Could it be? You know from your experience that you're a good tree. You're a good tree. You know that. And you felt God's Spirit. You felt God's presence. Then you can go back. I tell people, wrestle with the scriptures, but wrestle with the scriptures from the base of your experience. Don't forget your experience. When I teach Gay Christian 101, and I teach it at least twice a year, it's on Wednesday nights. It's a 7-week class where I go over the clobber passages. Those passages have been used to clobber GLBT folks. And then we also look for the positive scriptures and the positive role model, because I believe there are gay people in the Bible as well. But, you know, I tell people when they come to this class, take all of this information that I'm giving you, wrestle with it, ask the questions, deal with it, but deal with it from the perspective that you know the Lord. I tell people, don't tell me I don't know Jesus. That's one of the hot buttons. If you want to press my button, you tell me I don't know Jesus. I do know him. And many gay people know that they know him. You know, and wrestle with these scriptures, but do so from the experience that you know the Lord. And I've often said, you know, when we become Christians, God does not change our sexual orientation. He changes our hearts. He changes our heart. It's not the sexual orientation. Troy Perry, the founder of UFMCC, his classic book is "The Lord is my shepherd, and he knows I'm gay." And I found that in my own life, that, you know, I still remember my first prayer to God as a gay person, you know, when I've come to peace with it. And the roof didn't fall in, and I wasn't kicked out. It was almost as if the Lord was saying, well, I've known from the get-go.
Right.
And the calling that I've placed in your life is still the same. I knew that you were gay when I called you. I knew that you were gay before you were even created. And I tell people will come to my office saying, you know, I used to be a preacher. I used to be a Sunday school teacher. I used to be a youth minister. And I go, that's not changed.
Right.
Who said that changed? You know, God knew who you were when he called you. So be who you are.
And accept that, and just be that.
And honor this, just a couple of Wednesday nights ago in our Bible study, part of the lesson was be you. Be you. And it's a spiritual exercise. God went to great lengths to make us who we are. There's not another Pete. There's not another Richard. There's not another Tierra. Yeah. Well, honor God and his creation. God went to great lengths to make us unique. You know, there's not another person that has our DNA. What is it? I said, God loves diversity. How many thousands of snowflakes there are? And the changes in snowflakes are microscopic. The only person who sees the diversity of snowflakes is God. So God must love diversity. And we see that diversity in life.
Because if we were all the same person, why would God even have bothered to make more than one?
Oh yeah, he'd be bored.
Yeah, right. You know what I mean?
And you are who you are, whether you're heterosexual or gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. You are who you are. Honor what God has made. Be who you are. Be who you are. It's a spiritual exercise. Be who you are.
I've learned that, I don't know if you know this, but when I walked into your church in November, I had been on the battlefield, for a while, but a lot of things have spun out of control. But I just decided I was going to come to church, and I was about 15, 20 minutes late that Sunday. But when I walked in, you were speaking on, what was the annual...
Stewardship
Yes,
campaign.
stewardship
I almost
campaign.
died together when you came in. And she came in on the one Sunday we preach about money. The one Sunday we preach about money. And, because we have our annual stewardship campaign, and I thought,
But I was
Well,
supposed to
also,
be here
but you weren't.
I was supposed to be here so bad that I got a ride down here at 11:15, and I didn't think twice about being a money sermon or a message.
Yeah.
But there's so many people since I've been coming have seen differences, but yet they still want to judge. Is that common?
Oh, yes. And there's nothing that one can do about that.
Right.
As we often preach and teach, that we don't control what people do. We only control how we react to what people do. And I take great comfort. People will always be judging. People will always, have a critical spirit, and things of that nature. But I am reminded, and I have to remind myself, that they're not the judge. Thank God that they're not the judge.
Amen.
If Wattsburg Baptist was the judge, we'd be in trouble. We would be in trouble. But they're not the judge. If Mayfair Church of Christ, if they were the judge, we
Would be in big trouble.
we in trouble, girl. But they're not.
Right.
They're not. And so we have to remember that they're not. So what they say just doesn't matter. And I know it's easier said than done.
It is.
I know it's easier, but we still have to remind ourselves of that.
And be reminded.
Yes.
Was there any time in your journey in Christianity and being a gay Christian, or even before you came out being gay, was there ever a time that you got off path?
What do you mean by off the path?
That you got mad at God, maybe?
No, not really. And I know a lot of, ministry in the world that I minister. I encounter a lot of people who get angry with God, get mad at God, have struggles with God. And I fully understand it. But personally, I didn't.
Okay.
And I attribute that, believe it or not, to the Southern Baptist Church that I was raised in, believe it or not. I often say Southern Baptists do a real good job at preaching grace, but not always practicing it. And that preaching took, that I never had a doubt that God loved me. I never had a doubt about my salvation. I never had that crisis of faith. And I believe part of that was from the upbringing I had in the Baptist church, to where, God loves you no matter what. God's grace is for you no matter what. And I was raised in a time to where you didn't hear anti-gay sermons. In today's Baptist church, you will hear much more than what you did when I grew up. And then later on, I found out that the pastor that I had for most of my life, he had 12 children. So what are the odds that one of them, and turns out one of them is gay. And so that might have a role in the fact that we didn't hear anti-gay sermons. Maybe it didn't, but I have found out since that, there was a member of his family, one of his children, that was gay. But I never had that crisis of faith. Now, what do I say to people who do have it? What do I say to people who are mad at God? I first tell them to get in line. Get in line. Just get in line. That's nothing new. And fortunately, the Bible is filled with people who got mad at God. I tell people, don't stay there. But God's not afraid of you. God's not afraid to wrestle with you. Being able to be angry with God and even pitch a fit with God shows that you have a relationship with Him.
Amen.
We don't show out to strangers in general. In general, we don't show out. I know there's always an exception, but we only really argue and show out with people that we love and we know and part of our family. And when we argue with God and fight with God, it shows that, you know, that we're part of His family.
And connection.
And the connection. One of my favorite movies is The Apostle. It was in the late 90s with Robert Duvall. He should have received an Oscar, but that was also the year of the Titanic, so it won everything.
That was an amazing movie.
It was. It was. And it is my favorite movie because it showed a minister who was really real.
I did think, yeah.
Had weaknesses, had strengths, but he was real.
Right.
He was real. And one of my favorite scenes is when he's mad at God, and there's a scene at night where he's just shouting at God, God, I am mad at you. I am mad at you. You know, I've always called you Jesus. You've always called me Sonny. But I'm mad at you. I love you, but right now I'm mad at you. And I need to hear from you. I need to hear from you right now. He waits a few seconds. All right, then be like that, you know. and a neighbor calls the house, and June Carter Cash plays Robert Duvall's mother in the movie, and the neighbor's complaining that Sonny is shouting too much and yelling too much, and she just said, sometimes Sonny talks to the Lord, and sometimes he shouts to the Lord, and tonight he's angry and he's shouting, you know. That shows relationship. And I tell folks, don't be on. God already knows you're mad at Him,
Right.
you know, but engage God, wrestle with Him. I tell folks, Jacob continued to wrestle with God, and he didn't turn loose until he was blessed. So I tell people, wrestle with God, and don't turn loose until you get blessed. Because Jacob did end up with a limp, but he was a far better person with that limp than he ever was without it. And so I tell folks, now don't stay angry with God, because that's when we get off track. But it's okay to be angry with God. It's okay to wrestle with God. But just keep engaged with it. Don't abandon, don't abort the fight. Stay in there. He loves you enough to keep wrestling with you. And so, and you know, then we work through whatever the issue it is. But I first disarm people that it's okay. So often we've been told not to be angry with God. The Bible is, Moses and God went after each other. I mean, they went after it. And you find throughout the Bible people who had these fits with God, but they're there for a reason, and we can follow in their footsteps. Did I answer your question, Tierra?
Perfectly.
Tierra?
Perfectly. Pete, do you have anything you want to say?
I was going to say that, I personally, in my own personal spiritual walk, I was mad at God for a year, and I even told people would ask me, and I'd be like, right now God and I are really fighting, and I guess for me it came to a culmination of I stayed in that anger, and what it did for me was I really self-destructed my whole life, but in a way that was the turning point to become fully engaged as who I am today. So it's all beautiful. I'm getting chills on my shoulders are my signs of the angels. I deal a lot with angels, and I do Jesus as well. But I think everybody has their own individual spiritual walk as far as how they speak with spirit and that type of thing. And one thing I thought was really interesting that I don't know if you've ever talked or thought about before, but in ancient times, the gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual group, those were the shamans.
Right.
Those were the leaders. Those were the spiritual connections for the tribe.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And so it's interesting how that society has tried to flip that.
That it was once honored, and now
Right.
it's demonized.
Right. Exactly.
But you're exactly right.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that's really interesting. And like I was saying before, if there was only one person that was necessary, why would God make all these different people? So we are all individual in our walks with God or spirit or universe or whatever anybody wants to call it,
That's right.
is a completely an individual walk.
I agree with you.
I have just so many questions. Do you have any other questions?
Okay, well, I can feed off your questions. I've got lots of questions.
So,
yeah, cool. So, what for this church, the Spirit of the Cross? What is the affiliation, or is
we
there
are
affiliation?
independent. We are independent. At one point, we were part of MCC, but we are independent at this time.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, how does that work? How does that does like a group of people just get together and decide we're going to start a church, and that's where that happens?
This church was started back in 1986, and it started with, I think, 13 people, just a small group. It started as a mission from the Nashville church, and the Nashville church sent a pastor down here, and they just started church. They met in various buildings, from the old church building up at Montesano to one of the office buildings on Sparkman Drive, and it's just moved. But they moved here in the mid-90s with the building that was built, bought the land, and then of course we've added on and expanded the sanctuary. But yeah, it was started in '86 as part of MCC, but then back in 2006 we disaffiliated, and right now we're independent.
Okay. And you're speaking to really a worldwide audience right now. I know for our internet radio station and for the T-TimeWithTierra, we're getting almost more clicks from foreign nations than even from the U.S. So you're speaking to a lot of people out there that don't have the ability to have this spirituality with gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender questioning.
Oh, yes.
I know there's probably 3 or 4 other letters we're forgetting, and I'm so sorry.
That's right. And it's amazing.
I know.
You're a young girl. You're doing good.
I'm blessed.
You're doing good.
Thankful.
Can you describe what grace means to you?
Wow. Where do I begin? Grace is God. Grace is receiving something that you certainly do not deserve. It is beyond even our comprehension. And I know, there's no definition that's really complete. Any definition, even from the most deep students of theology, whatever they come up with, it's still short, because it's the finite trying to describe the infinite. And so there's just so far that we can go. But grace to me is life. Grace is the blessings of God. It is salvation. It is forgiveness. It is God. When you say the word God, there are 2 things that come to mind immediately: love and grace. And we have, and we know how God is, because from the Christian perspective anyhow, is that Jesus is God. Jesus is God with skin on. So if we want to know what God is like, all we have to do is look at Jesus. And Jesus was so graceful, so humble, so compassionate, so loving, so forgiving. And that's grace. The only people that Jesus came down hard on were those who judged others, the self-righteous and the judgmental. I don't know if I answered your question, but grace is God. Grace is love. Grace is salvation. And it is that, what's the old acronym we grew up with, God's riches at Christ's expense, But, that's a little cute way to say, but it's still incomplete. It is God. And I've said this before. I believe when we get to heaven, there's going to be a lot of surprises. A lot of surprises. We're going to be a surprise to a lot of people. I think a lot of people are going to be mad at God that he let GLBT folks in, but we are his children too. And I believe there's going to be a lot of surprises in heaven. But I've said this, I believe the biggest surprise in heaven is going to blow us away. It's just how loving God is. I think it's going to blow us away. And even from churches like ours that emphasize God's love and God's grace. And we do. You know, this church, you're going to get the message of God's love. You're going to get the message of God's grace. And other churches will say, well, we tell it like it is. You know, no, you don't. Listen to what they preach. Listen to what they teach. And they will emphasize one attribute of God over another. I don't care what they say, just listen to them preach, and you'll hear what they emphasize. We emphasize the love of God. We emphasize the grace of God, and we're point blank about that. No apologies. But even churches that emphasize the love of God and the grace of God, we're going to be surprised at just how loving He really is. And I think it's going to blow us away of just how loving God is and how much grace He really does have.
And I think really kind of the undertones of even what you're talking about with grace, a lot of it is self-forgiveness.
Oh, yes.
Do that.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of what we bring upon ourselves, and we hold ourselves accountable to these standards of even maybe being straight that we can't really or shouldn't.
That's right. You know, one of the there's a lot of favorite verses around this church, and one that we love is Romans 8:1. Therefore, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. What part of that do you not understand?
Exactly.
No condemnation means no condemnation. And if God's not condemning you,
Then who is?
then why are you condemning yourself? And why do you care who else is condemning you?
Right.
Therefore, there is no condemnation
Yes.
in Christ Jesus.
As RuPaul says, it's none of your business what anybody else thinks of you.
That's right. Oh, I love RuPaul.
Oh, don't you know? Don't you just?
Oh, you can't love yourself.
How you gonna love anybody else?
That's right.
We're all born naked and the rest is drag.
I love her.
When you pray, what do you pray for?
Oh, wow.
We're getting deep today.
Well, no, that's a good question. First of all, when I pray, I talk to the Lord just like I'm talking to you. I really do. And when I don't take time to pray, I miss it. It's like, I miss it. But when I pray, a typical prayer that I would have would be personal praise, personal thanksgivings, always confess my sins. And then I just share what's on my heart. Everything from, help me to reflect you, help me to be more Christ-like, help me to be more sensitive to the needs around. I preached about not complaining today. You're blessed of why you're complaining about something. Even on your worst day, you're still blessed. And asking for God's protection and asking for God's blessing, but not a prayer that's totally selfish, but how can I be more Christ-like in actions towards people around me? Help me to be attentive to the opportunity to be a blessing to someone. But I pray real prayers, not necessarily the pulpit prayers that sound so churchy, but they're private, as prayer should be. To me, prayer is the most intimate thing that you can do. I tell couples that praying together is far more intimate than sex. Sex, and that's can easily be found and all that stuff. But when a couple prays together, they are becoming vulnerable. Because when we pray, we become vulnerable because we're before someone who knows all things. Right. And so we really, and that's intimacy. I think prayer, in fact, my definition of prayer that I've used for years in ministry is prayer is intimacy with God. And it's far more than just asking request. It's listening. It's a conversation that you have. Did I answer your question? Because tell me if I didn't answer your question.
You answered it from your heart. I felt your heart.
Do it again. But yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, meditation is kind of the same as prayer. It's the same kind of.
Absolutely. Do what you need to do.
Right.
Do what you need to do.
And I often find, like I heard the analogy one time of a concert pianist who said if he didn't practice one day, he knew. If it was 2 days, his friends knew. If it was 3 days, his audience knew. And that's the same thing for me with meditation. I know if I skip a day, I know it. You know what I mean? It's the same thing I think you're saying with prayer.
We do, absolutely. And I encourage folks, do what you need to do. No matter what you call it.
Right. Because it's connection either way, isn't it?
It's connection. And again, if we just look at Scripture, which are stories that help us in our walk with the Lord, you will find the Lord interacting with people in so many ways. I mean, there's a story where he used a talking donkey, So, and I like that because we are different people. So how God communicates with me may be different than you. My way's not better than your way. Just like a parent deals with each child a little differently. You don't deal with a child the same way. Well, who says that God deals with us the same way? He created Richard Barham, and so he's with the strengths and the weaknesses, the flaws, and the cracks, and all of that stuff. And so we should all do what works for us. Again, there's no cookie cutter way of this is the way that God speaks to us. And what has happened to me must happen to you. Right. It's the same way with when Jesus healed people. He never healed two people the same way. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he touched. One time he made little mud pies, and one time he spit. And I mean, because if there was one way, we would try to copy the method. We would try to copy the method, thinking there was something in the method that does it. But it's our relationship. Yeah. So I tell folks, do what works for you when it comes to you and your walk of faith.
I often see it, because I deal a lot with gyms, I often see it as though each one of us is a different facet of a gem, and we all refract the light in a little bit different of a way.
Preach.
Yeah.
Preach.
That's the way I always kind of see it.
Preach.
I do a lot of times. People watching the show.
You're preaching now. Preach or Pete.
I love it, and I love that you're talking about how we're all blessed, because I think so many people forget, the sun came up this morning, we have oxygen to breathe, most of us have a place to lay our head, we have a change, I know I have at least one change of clothing, I know Tierra.
Yeah, even on our worst day, we're still blessed.
Absolutely.
And it's so easy to get caught up in the troubles that we have.
Because you'll get 100 great emails, you get one bad email.
And we'll focus on the one bad.
Right.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I preached on that.
Did you?
This morning.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No complaining.
And I also want to say, as far as the protection, I love that too, because the job that I do can be a little bit dangerous, and I know what I do every morning is I call forth to my spirit how my day is going to be, and that's exactly the way it is. And we have that power if we have that belief. We can call forward, and we are. I feel so surrounded by angels and protection all the time. And so people will say, "Aren't you scared of doing this?" I'm like, "No, not even a little." Because I know I'm eternal anyway too, on top of that, so I've taken all the sting out of it.
Every single day I pray the protection of Psalm 91. And Psalm 91 speaks of angels, or guardian angels.
Would you tell it? Would you repeat it? Do you know?
Well, that in Psalms 91 that he will give angels charge over you. So that's the verse where we come up with guardian angels. But the entire Psalm 91, is a prayer of protection. And some people who might be watching this might be going, "Well, I don't know how to pray." I don't know how to pray. That sounds good, kumbaya, but I don't know how to pray. And I tell folks, well, start practicing it. But just talk. But talk to the Lord like we're talking. But still, that's a barrier for some folks. Like, and I tell folks, pray the Psalms. We have a prayer book. It's called the Psalms. It's for the Christian faith. It's been around 2,000 years. For those of the Jewish faith, it goes further back than that. But you will find your situation in the Psalms. There's 150 of them. And you will find your situation in the Psalms somewhere. People who are lonely, the psalmist is filled with people who are lonely. Pray their prayers. See how God works with them. You're mad at what seems to be injustice. Wait a minute, God, I'm doing everything right, but these heathens over here are doing everything wrong, and they're prospering, and I'm miserable. What's up with that? Well, the psalmist had those same questions. Why is it that those who do evil, they get blessed, it seems like, and God, why is this happening? Have you changed your mind on things? Are you not keeping your promises anymore? I mean, so many people who come in and see me and sit on this couch and talk to me, 90% of the time they are describing something that is dealt with in the Psalms. That the Psalms are real. They're so human, When Jesus said on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? He didn't pull that out of his butt. That's a psalm. That's Psalm 22. He was praying a psalm. And so I tell people, if you don't even know how to pray, just open up Psalms. That's prayer, So you can pray.
So it sounds like a lot of people, and I know even for me a little bit, a lot of people's problem, or not problem, but where they're coming from is they're spending their time comparing themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you don't know what somebody else's walk is. I mean, it may look perfect from the outside, but you don't know. Did you clutch your pearls on that one?
I almost had to wave them on.
And Pete, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, is be yourself. When you are yourself, there's no need to compare yourself to other people, because God's not going to ask.
Right?
I've been teaching on this on Wednesday nights.
Okay.
I've been teaching a study, Breaking the Addiction of Approval.
Oh, I love that.
And how so many people live their lives, based on what other people think. If they're approved by somebody, they're on top of the world. If somebody disapproves of them, they have a miserable day. And you're in bondage to the opinion of other people. Right. And the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians, I care very little what you think of me. If he said I don't care at all, we know he'd be lying. We all would care. But he says I care very little. In other words, I'm not going to let your opinions dominate and control me. Yes, I care, I'm human, but I'm not going to let it control me. And so how do we overcome our addiction to approval? And one of the lessons was about don't compare yourself to other people. That was the lesson that we talked about, how we are each unique and what great lengths God has made us to be. Now, honor that by being ourselves, and don't compare. When we stand before God one day, it's not going to come up.
Well, Jimmy Sue let us about you.
Why didn't you preach like Billy Graham? Why didn't you have the biggest church in the world like Joel Osteen? That's not going to come up. Right. And it used to bother me. In fact, during that class, I had a person who asked, did you compare yourself to the TV preachers and so forth? And when I was young, I did. But I soon learned, I've got to be Richard. I've got to be Richard. Warts and all, I've got to be Richard. And when you realize that you don't have to compare yourself to anyone else, it's liberating.
Right. And no judgment, but some of those TV preachers, we've seen what's happened. So
Oh, don't get me started. That's a whole new episode. You know, don't even get me started on that. But you know, that we don't need to compare ourselves. You know, how often do we buy things we can't afford and don't need simply because we're trying to get approval from somebody else?
Absolutely.
It's maddening. Just be yourself. Be who you are.
Right.
Be who, and it's a way to honor God. So yes, I've spiritualized that.
That's fantastic.
For those that are watching, that you say be who you are, I speaking from not knowing who I was to coming into terms with who I am. What could you tell them? How do you? Some people don't. Well, look at themselves and can't even tell what they look like. They don't even know what color clothes they have on, because I think they kind of avoid knowing who they are. What do you tell people that? What would you say to someone that trying to discover who they really are and accepting, not necessarily accepting, but just getting a glimpse of who they are? I mean, does that make sense? I know people who wear blinders.
Yeah. And my gut instinct would be that they're afraid of something. Around here, there's a saying of mine that everybody in the church knows. Fear is the number one enemy of the Christian. And fear is. And so as a pastor, I would try to see, you know, what is it that they're fearing? You know, what is it that's preventing them from taking a look at themselves and being who they are? It's a very complicated question.
Yeah, it is.
But that would be my initial reaction, is to try to break down the fears and to reaffirm to that person God's love and God's grace and God's goodness. God didn't make you to hate you. And what God created, he called good. So if God's already called you good, aren't you curious of what it is and who it is? You know, take a peek. God has already said it's good. And so it goes back to God's love. It goes back to God's goodness. And, you know, but that would be my initial reaction, is to emphasize love God, and that there's no reason to fear who you are. And just take that little step forward, you know, and you might be surprised at just what a wonderful creation that God has made.
I think it's a very encouraging beginning.
Oh, it is.
Someone.
And it is a journey. It is a journey, and sometimes it's a journey of a lifetime, but we keep at it. But that's my initial pastoral response to that would be, you know, what God made, God called good. And God made you, so you're good. Now let's take a look at it. Let's take a look
Good
at it.
answer.
I love that, because I know even for a period of my life, when I was kind of going through, I guess you'd call the dark night of the soul, I couldn't look myself in the mirror even when I shaved. So I went for about 6 months of shaving without even looking myself in the mirror, which is kind of tough to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little bit scary too. But that really resonated what you said with as far as, like, you know, not being able to really kind of look at yourself. That's interesting.
And it's also important to surround yourself with good people, people who are positive.
Right. Do you find that it's our choice of who? Because so many people think that they have to surround themselves with who society says. I mean, I think especially in the gay community, we choose our family, don't we?
Oh yes, and that's a blessing. It can also be a curse.
Amen.
You know, that we can choose the wrong friends that can bring us down. And but you need to find a support group of friends who are encouraging, who love you, who you know are in your corner, and that's helpful too. You know, my advice to people when they come out, and you know, in the ministry that I'm in, I know hundreds of coming out stories, and if they come to me before they come out, you know, what's your advice? I always tell them to, you know, come out at your own pace, who you want to come out, how and when, and all that. But also, as you come out, create a support team for you, because you have to, you know, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. And so be prepared in case that parent does reject you, in case that friend rejects you, that you're not then alone, that you have a network of friends that you have already built and created. And in the GLBT world, we have some very strong people. There's some strength.
Some right there.
Well, there's some strength. I guess one of my pet peeves, is that I think gay people don't know their history.
Right.
They don't.
I'm a history person. I'm a history person. And so often we get into the woe is me, I'm a victim, and sometimes we are. I don't need to cast aspersions on that. But sometimes it's like, you need some of that drag queen blood from Stonewall.
Right.
Let me give you some of that strength. There's a lot of strong people in GLBT history, and you need to tap into that. We do overcome. We are strong. You knock us down, we're going to get back up. And a lot of gay people don't know the heritage that they have, that you are a strong person. You can win. You don't have to be trampled on. You don't have to be rejected. You are somebody. And you need to surround yourself with people. Kind of like on RuPaul's Drag Race. Honey, pull yourself together, girl. And we need more of pull yourself together. And let's be strong.
Was it good God, girl, get a grip?
Something like that. And we need people to be able, that we know who love us,
Right.
but can also speak truth to us, who have our best interest at heart. But there's a lot of strength in the gay community. There's a lot of strength in our heritage. And it's like, wait a minute, we don't have to take this. No. Okay, somebody rejected me. Wait a minute, I come from a long line of people who've been rejected.
Right.
But we stood. We have withstood. And look where we are today.
Absolutely. And Tierra it participated with me in a live call-in show. Do you remember that, Tierra? And one of our questions was from a young man that called in. He was like, how do I come out? So that was, I love it. We actually thankfully gave almost the same advice as you just gave. So.
And we all know because we've walked it one way or the other.
Right.
GLBT, we all, our paths, every story is different. Every story is unique, but there's certainly some similar threads. And I think one of the greatest pieces of advice for people in coming out, or things that they need to know, is that they're not alone. There's been people sit on this couch and they describe what's going on, and they really think they're the first one that's ever had to deal with that. And I go, honey, we got a whole church that's walked, a very similar, they know we have a whole church full of people who have walked a very similar path, and look at them now.
Right. They're like, you're at step 8. You're about to hit step 9.
Every Easter, and if the tape runs, you're talking to a preacher who's long-winded.
We're all right. Going.
One of my lines that I always say on every Easter Sunday, I don't care what angle I'm preaching the resurrection, I'm going to get this line in somehow. I say it every year, and I will continue to say it as long as I'm pastor, is that I know the resurrection is true. I know the resurrection is true. We know scientifically you can't prove something is empty. At the base of it, Christians accept the truth of Jesus coming out of that grave, his resurrection. It's by faith. And we'll never separate faith from Christianity. But I tell people, I know the resurrection is true. How? Because I'm looking at it. I've seen people come through our doors and they were figuratively dead. They were on the last knot of the last knot of the last knot of the last knot of the last rope that they had. And they were walking dead people. They had been rejected, abused, been given up on themselves. And then they come into a place, and there are many churches that provide the same thing, but they come into a place to where you're loved and you receive a positive message, you receive the good news, and look at you now. You're in your sane mind, you're healthy, you're active, and what a difference has been made. Don't tell me the resurrection isn't true. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at resurrected people.
That's beautiful.
And I'll say it I'll say it this Easter.
Okay.
So, in some way.
It has to get put in there.
Yeah, some way. I'm going to go there.
I love it.
Some way.
Well, do you have anything else you want to ask? Anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to? I know Wednesday night Bible class.
Yeah, I've often said that if the Lord lets me live and I become a really, really, really old queen, let's say the Lord lets me live to my 80s and 90s, and I believe the message that I will preach then is the same message that I preach today, and that is God loves you. If there's one thing that people have to understand is God loves you as you are. I wish I could get people in headlocks. The best that this Nelly preacher could is to get somebody in a headlock and just pour this in. God loves you, and don't forget that. God loves you just as you are. And then the other message is the Bible's our friend. The Bible does not condemn us, and the Bible's our. Don't run away from the stories of the Bible and the teachings of the Bible. There's no need to run away from it. It's been misinterpreted at times. It's not the first time nor the last time that it will be misinterpreted. But God loves you, and the Bible is our friend and not our enemy, would be the two things that I plan on saying until I draw my last breath.
What a way to go.
That's right.
Well, we want to thank you so much for this today.
Oh, thank you,
It's been a
Tierra.
blessing.
You are a blessing.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Pete. Thank you.
And we want to thank you all for tuning in to episode 13. We thank you in advance for all you do for us, and peace out, and be kind to one another. We love you.